I had never believed in ghosts, until I moved into this old house. The moment I stepped in, it felt like something was off. It wasn't the creaky floors or the faded wallpaper, but something in the air, something heavy, like the house itself was holding on to its past. Still, I didn't mind. It was a steal for a first-time buyer. The first night was uneventful, and I had a decent sleep. But that night, the whispers started. They were faint, like voices carried on a breeze, but there was no wind. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. But the whispers came every night, always at the same time, around 3 a.m. Each time I woke up, the voices seemed to be getting louder, more insistent. "Help me," one voice pleaded one night. "Get out," another whispered the next. I convinced myself it was nothing. But one night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The whispers weren't coming from the walls anymore, they were coming from the hallway. I got up, slowly, and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. The air felt colder as I moved toward the living room. I couldn't see anything, but I felt eyes on me, watching from the shadows. Then I saw them. The shadows. They weren't cast by any light source, they moved across the walls as if they had a life of their own. No, not shadows. Figures. Tall, thin shapes that shifted across the room, always just out of reach. I should have turned around, but my feet wouldn't move. The whispers were louder now, almost a chant, "Stay with us." I turned to run, but something caught my eye in the hallway mirror. I don't know why I looked. But I did. A woman. She was standing behind me, in the reflection. Her face was pale, and her eyes, oh God, her eyes. They were dark, hollow, and staring directly at me. Her lips curved into a smile, but it wasn't a smile. It was a grimace. A twisted, unnatural grin. I screamed, but the figure didn't move. I turned around, expecting her to be there, but there was nothing. Nothing but the sound of the whispers, which were now louder than ever, filling the room, and the overwhelming sense that she was still there, watching me. I haven't been able to sleep in that house since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, and I see her face in the mirror. I'm moving out next week, but I'm not sure if that will be enough to make the shadows leave.
I was renovating an old apartment I'd just moved into, mostly cosmetic stuff, repainting, fixing broken tiles, that sort of thing. Everything seemed fine, at first. The apartment was large, with high ceilings, and a little bit of character, but something strange happened when I was working on the closet in the master bedroom. While pulling out some old wallpaper, I found a hidden door. It was barely noticeable, just a thin seam running along the back wall. I assumed it was a maintenance closet or storage space, so I grabbed a crowbar and opened it. What I found inside wasn't a closet, but a small, empty room. The air was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The walls were covered in dust, and there was only one small window, boarded up and sealed shut. But the thing that caught my attention was the scratching. The walls were scratched up, faint gouges like someone, or something, had been trying to escape. I thought maybe some animal had gotten in, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat. But as I went further into the room, I noticed something worse. There, on the floor, was an old journal. It looked ancient, its pages brittle, but I couldn't stop myself from flipping through it. The entries were written in a frantic, erratic hand, each one more desperate than the last. The author, who called themselves E., described being trapped in the room, their food running out, and something terrible clawing at the walls. They spoke of hearing whispers, dark promises, and something that followed them, waiting in the shadows. The last entry sent a shiver down my spine. I can feel it. It's coming closer. The walls are shaking. I can hear the scratching, it's right behind me. I don't think I'm going to make it. I didn't think much of it at first. People were crazy, right? But as I was about to leave the room, I froze. I heard it. A faint sound, coming from the wall. Scratching. I thought maybe it was the house settling, so I rushed out, but that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the scratching again, this time louder, closer. I tried to dismiss it, but the sound only grew more frantic. I knew then, someone, had been trapped in that room. But that was impossible, right? It had been sealed for decades. I went to check the room the next morning. The journal was gone. And the scratching had stopped.
It was just another late night. I was lounging on the couch, scrolling through my phone when the call came through. The number was unfamiliar, but I picked it up anyway. "Hello?" I said groggily. At first, there was only silence, then a soft, raspy breath came through the receiver. I thought it was just a prank call, so I was about to hang up when a voice whispered, "I can see you." I froze. Who was this? I immediately hung up and blocked the number. But less than a minute later, the phone rang again. Same number. Reluctantly, I answered. "What do you want?" I demanded. The voice, now clearer, said, "I'm right behind you." My heart skipped a beat. I spun around in my chair, but there was no one there. I checked the windows, the doors, but everything was locked. No one was there. I figured it was some sick joke, so I didn't think much of it. But then it happened again. The next night, at exactly 11:55 p.m., my phone rang. Same number. I hesitated but answered anyway. The voice was even more distinct this time, almost calm. "You're not alone." I was starting to get paranoid, so I called my friend and stayed on the phone with him for the rest of the night. But that didn't stop the calls. They came every night, always at 11:55, always from the same number. One night, I tried answering in a different way. "Who are you?" I asked. The voice didn't speak. Instead, there was breathing. Deep, labored breaths, almost like someone was standing right next to me. It felt like the air grew colder. The last time I answered, I heard something that made my blood run cold. "I'm closer than you think." I haven't been able to sleep properly since. The call stopped for a while, but every night when I lie in bed, I hear that same breathing. And every time I check my phone, there's a new message, "I'm still watching."
I've always been skeptical of ghost stories, but after what happened to me, I'm not so sure anymore. It started when I moved into a new apartment. It was a small, one-bedroom unit in a quiet part of town, not far from the city center. The landlord was an older woman, and she seemed nice enough, though a little eccentric. She warned me about the apartment's history, but I didn't think much of it. Old buildings often had rumors attached to them, right? The first few nights were uneventful. But one evening, as I was getting ready to sleep, I noticed something strange. The mirror in the hallway. It had been cracked when I moved in, and I had been meaning to replace it, but hadn't gotten around to it yet. I was brushing my teeth when I saw something in the reflection. A man. He was standing there, in the hallway, just staring at the mirror. He didn't move or blink, his expression frozen in a blank stare. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. My heart was racing. Maybe I was just tired, I thought. Maybe I'd imagined it. But the next night, the same thing happened. And the next. Every night, without fail, I would see that same man standing in the hallway. I checked the apartment from top to bottom, but I found nothing, no signs of anyone being there, no hidden passages, no other mirrors reflecting him. Then one night, I decided to test something. I stood in front of the cracked mirror and waited. I waited until I saw the man again, and this time, I spoke. "Who are you?" I whispered. The man didn't respond. But as I watched him, something terrifying happened. He slowly raised his hand and pressed it against the mirror, as if he were trying to touch me. I felt a cold breeze brush past my neck, and I instantly froze. That's when I heard it, a voice, barely audible but unmistakable, "Let me in." I ran out of the apartment that night and stayed with a friend. The next day, I returned to find the mirror had been completely shattered, the cracks now jagged and wider than I remembered. I don't know who or what that man was, but I left the apartment that day, and I've never looked back. But every time I pass by a cracked mirror, I can't help but feel like someone is still standing on the other side.
I was always the curious type, the one who wanted to know everything. When I was younger, I loved to explore old, abandoned places. So when I found a strange old board game at a thrift store, I couldn't resist buying it. The game was called The Dark Path. The box was tattered, the print faded, and the artwork was unsettling, figures in shadowed cloaks, standing around a dark path leading to nowhere. I figured it was just an old, creepy novelty item, but something about it intrigued me. That night, I decided to play the game with my best friend, Jason. We set it up in the living room, and the rules were simple: roll the dice, move along the path, and answer questions about your fears and past experiences. The game seemed innocent enough at first, just like any other board game, but it wasn't long before things started to feel off. The first round was normal. But the second time we rolled the dice, the board changed. One of the figures on the path seemed to move on its own. Jason and I looked at each other, both a little unsettled, but we dismissed it as our imagination. But then the questions started. The first one was simple, asking about our childhood. But the next question was strange. It asked, "Who have you wronged, and will they seek revenge?" Jason laughed nervously, but I could feel the air in the room change. It felt colder. The next roll, Jason got a card that said, "Return to the beginning. The path is not yet finished." We laughed it off, but when I looked at the board, I noticed something terrifying. The shadows in the game were moving. The figures weren't stationary anymore, they were slowly shifting, and some of them were looking directly at us. I told Jason we needed to stop, but he insisted we finish. As we moved further along the path, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered. I heard whispers that seemed to come from the walls, soft and unintelligible, like someone was standing just behind me. Then, when we rolled for the final round, the game board changed completely. The path now led to a dark, black void, and in the middle of it, a symbol I recognized. It was the same one that had been carved into the back of the game box. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. And in the darkness, I heard it, a voice. "You played the game, now it's time to finish it." Jason screamed, but when I looked back at him, he was gone. The room was empty, the game still sitting there on the table. I've never seen Jason again. I burned the game that night, but every now and then, I feel like I'm being watched. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear the faint sound of dice rolling in the distance. I had just moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a charming little place, a bit old, but perfect for me. I'd recently gone through a tough breakup, so I was looking for a fresh start. Everything seemed perfect, until the first night. It was around 2 a.m. when I woke up to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the sound persisted, a tapping. Not from the windows, but from the walls. I got up, checked around, and found nothing. The house was quiet again, and I shrugged it off. But the tapping didn't stop. It came every night at the same time, 2 a.m., sharp and rhythmic. It started in one corner of the house and would slowly move through the walls, always heading toward my bedroom. I thought it might be the house settling, but the sound felt too deliberate, like something was moving inside the walls. The next night, I decided to stay up. I sat in the dark, waiting for the tapping to begin. And when it did, I heard it coming from inside the closet. My heart raced, but I convinced myself it was just an animal, maybe a squirrel or something. I opened the closet door, but it was empty. That's when I noticed something else. The shadows. They weren't right. The shadows in the corners of the room were moving, stretching toward me, as if they were alive. I backed away slowly, but the tapping grew louder, more frantic. The shadows grew larger. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. The shadows retreated, and the house was calm again. The next day, I installed cameras around the house, thinking I was just losing my mind. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, I saw something I can't explain, a figure, a dark shape standing in the corner of my bedroom, its face obscured by shadows. The tapping had stopped for a while, but now it was back, and worse than before. The figure had moved closer. I don't know what it was, but I'm not staying here anymore. I packed up and left, but I can still feel it watching me. Every time I'm in a dark room, I hear the tapping, and I see those shadows stretching toward me again.